Hey, tonight we ride beneath the ink-black sky of ancient Japan, where fog curls like silk scarves over pine-covered ridges. You glide past flickering lanterns and paper-walled houses, the scent of cedar and rain on your breath. Somewhere beyond this sleepy mountain pass lies a truth mostly forgotten, tale spun not from samurai scrolls or monk-led chronicles, but whispered through worn armor straps and hidden scars. This is the realm of the women warriors of ancient Japan, where nobility wore steel and defiance bloomed behind folding fans. Revealing the little known is what we're all about tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Press the notification bell to update many new videos. And hey, post your city and your local time in the comments. Let's see who else is riding into this misty history with you tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your journey at the very edge of the historical record. The year, sometime in the 3rd century CE. The place, Yamatayan, ancient kingdom shrouded in mystery, possibly located on one of Japan's southern islands. And seated on the throne is a woman not just feared, but revered, Queen Himiko. You hear the gossip even now. Traders from the Korean peninsula, ambassadors from China's Wei dynasty, and villagers from neighboring lands all speak of a queen who never married, who ruled not with brute force but with magic. They say she spoke with spirits. Her palace, surrounded by 1,000 armed guards, held no husband nor heir, just whispering priests and divination tools. You see her now, cloaked in layered white robes, painted with cinnabar, her fingers stained with ink and spell ash. She moves like someone who knows the future. Historians still argue whether Himiko was one ruler or many, whether she truly existed or was a stitched-together legend, but her name appears in Chinese chronicles. They called her a shamaness, a ruler who united warring tribes through ritual and fear. You lean in closer. She is conducting a ritual by the light of a flickering oil lamp, reading signs in tortoise shells and animal bones. Her lips whisper something, not quite words, not quite breathed. Suddenly, a room of bickering chieftains falls silent. Her power is palpable, yet completely intangible. Not the edge of a blade, but the edge of belief, one tale mostly ignored. In schoolbook says she wore a crown carved from bone and sealed alliances with drops of her own blood. Another suggests her army, while never seen, was said to be led by women ghost-like figures who struck from shadows to maintain order across her scattered domain. Fringe folklore, maybe, but strange how often these women appear in regional myths. Long after her death, speaking of death, her end is as mysterious as her reign. Some say she vanished. Others say a violent war broke out after her passing, only calmed when another woman took her place, Igio, a girl barely in her teens. You imagine that 13 years old, stepping into a shaman queen's sandals, possibly, still wearing her hair in braids. You drift toward that court now. You see young Io seated beneath painted silk canopies, nervously tracing kanji in the dirt, while elder advisors whisper war strategies. A ruler born from necessity, not ambition. A girl who, according to some old scrolls, ended a civil war not with swords, but with rice and silence. Scholars still debate whether Io was real or a political puppet stitched from legend to calm a panicked nation. But here, in the hush of night, she feels as real as rain, and as you wander back down from Yamatai's throne room, through its misty courtyards and hollow corridors, a thought lingers. Power in ancient Japan didn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wore prophecy. Still, this was just the beginning. Himiko didn't fight with naginata or lead troops from horseback, but her shadow set the stage. Generations later, women would lift real swords, ride real horses, and stain the battlefield with real blood. But their roots quiet, unrecorded, magical stretch back to this very moment. Oh, and one last odd detail to carry with you. Some scrolls describe Queen Himiko's personal attendants, not as women or men, but as neither. Dressed in flowing robes, they served in silence. Could they have been early gender non-conforming spiritualists, cross-dressing spies, or just poetic metaphor? Historians still argue, of course, but you're not here for certainty, are you? You're here for what pulses beneath the paper walls. You descend from the realm of Himiko into colder winds, northward, into the shadowy territories beyond the orderly farms of central Japan. It's wilder here. Mist rolls low across marshes, tangled forests hum with invisible life, and the hills rise like sleeping beasts. You've entered Emishi country. The Yamato court called these people rebels, barbarians, but to you, they feel more like free spirits. And the women? Well, you're about to meet some of the fiercest warriors you've never heard of. The Emishi women did not wait at home for word of war. No, they fought alongside their menor when necessary, without them. You crouch in the underbrush now, watching a raiding party silently prepare an ambush. A dozen figures, some men, some women, it's hard to tell in the half-light. Everyone wears hardened leather, animal furs, and painted masks. One woman draws a curved blade from behind her back and kisses it just once, before melting into the trees. The Japanese imperial records don't like to admit this, but some fragments, forgotten lines in military logs, and dismissed folk tales tell of women with fox hair and eagle eyes who led surprise attacks on Yamato patrols, and one fringe legend claims an entire regiment was driven into a swamp by a single woman whistling from the treetops. Her name, frustratingly, has been lost, but you sense her breath still lingers in the northern wind. You follow the group now, as they move in near silence. Their weapons are crude by samurai standards, curved hunting swords, bone-tipped arrows, and axes with hafts wrapped in horsehide. But their movements are sharp, disciplined, terrifying. The Yamato soldiers, with their polished armor and formal ranks, never stood a chance in this terrain. There's something else, charms. You spot them tied into braids, dangling from belts, even burned into the hilts of weapons. Fox teeth, carved. Stones, tiny fabric bundles filled with something you don't want to sniff. Spiritual warfare, they believed, was just as real as physical combat. A woman might carry her dead sister's fingernail in a pouch to draw, her strength or to curse an enemy with bad dreams. Historians still argue whether these stories are real accounts or just scary campfire tales told to justify harsh crackdowns on the Emishi tribes. But there's a curious pattern. Every time a Yamato general failed to conquer the north, a mysterious female warrior would appear in the blame report. Coincidence? You stop by a grandmother stirs a stew of roots and fish, while telling children how her own mother once held off a patrol with nothing but a slingshot and a goat's skull. You're skeptical until she casually lifts her sleeve and shows the jagged scar that runs from wrist to elbow. You swallow your doubts with a spoonful of hot broth. The Emishi eventually fell absorbed, scattered, renamed. The Yamato court sent generals with horse archers, siege engines, and bureaucrats. They paved roads through the forests, built fortresses, stamped rice taxes onto the land. But not all the women disappeared. Some married into local clans, others became legends. One tale, almost certainly exaggerated, tells of a widow who wandered into a Yamato camp pretending to sell mushrooms, only to assassinate a governor with a poisoned hatpin. You chuckle. Fringe. Yes, but tell that to the governor. And now for your quirky tidbit. According to some odd 11th century folklore, Emishi women trained hawks to hunt enemy hairpieces. Apparently, if a noble samurai lost his wig in battle, it was a dishonor, worse than death. Whether or not that's true, the image of a fierce woman laughing as her bird snatches a samurai's hair never quite leaves you. Still, the Emishi didn't build castles. They didn't write history books. So their women, no matter how fierce, exist mostly as rumors on the wind. But you remember them. The way they moved through trees like shadows. The way they fought not for empire, but for kin, for forest, for freedom. And so, as you return southward, past quiet lakes and snow-brushed peaks, you carry their memory with you. Not as a name, but as a feeling. The feeling that somewhere, in some pine-thick valley, a woman with a curved blade and a foxbone charm might still be waiting, just out of sight. Now the fog lifts, just a little, and you find yourself stepping through a wooden gate carved with the family crest of a mid-ranking samurai clan. It's quiet, peaceful even. Beyond the threshold, you see a wide courtyard raked into precise patterns, flanked by halls with open shoji screens and low eaves. And there, beneath the shade of a maple tree, a girl no older than 13 swings a naginata with smooth, measured grace. She's barefoot, her sleeves tied back, her movements elegant but sharp enough to cut through the hush. You watch her pivot, twist, and strike imaginary enemies with practiced precision. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong end of that blade. And yet, in this era of the Heian period, say, the 10th or 11th century, she's not considered a warrior, not officially. She's simply a daughter preparing for the future. You're beginning to notice a pattern. The girls of noble houses weren't always raised just to pour tea and write poetry. In fact, it was considered proper for a refined woman to know how to defend her home. You peek inside the dojo where older girls spar with wooden practice poles, laughter and bruises traded in equal measure. Their mothers look on not with disapproval, but with quiet pride. This is the world of the proto-Onna-Bugeisha, the noble daughters trained in self-defense, household command, and the social etiquette of not blinking while stabbing a bandit in the neck. In times of war, samurai husbands might be gone for months or years. Who was left to protect the estate? Who oversaw the servants, drilled the guards, and negotiated with hungry peasants during a drought? That's right, the women. You drift past the training yard and into a side chamber where 2 girls sit cross-legged, polishing armor. One whispers stories she heard from an aunt about a woman who disarmed 3 robbers using nothing but her hairpin. The other rolls her eyes. She probably used a hidden knife, she mutters. Everyone has one. You pause. Does everyone have one? Beneath her obi sash, tucked into the folds of her kimono, each girl carries a kakona short dagger. Not ceremonial, not symbolic. Real, sharp, ready, worn not for show, but as part of a woman's daily attire. You can't help but imagine the bizarre wardrobe malfunctions of the era. One wrong step, and boom slice through a silken underlayer. Historians still argue whether the widespread naginata training of these noble daughters was for true combat or just for virtue signaling. Some claim it was about discipline and honor, not warfare. But you've now seen the bruises. You've watched the drills. You've heard the whispered warnings between sisters about the bandits from the western hills. Something tells you, these girls weren't just playing soldier, and here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some women practiced fan fighting, yes, with actual fans. Made of iron, these tessent were disguised as elegant accessories, but could break noses or deflect blades in a pinch. One old poem describes a court lady using hers to knock out a drunk noble who got too handsy. Honestly, iconic now. Imagine yourself sitting in the warm bathhouse after a day of training, steam curling around your face. An older woman, perhaps a retired warrior turned matron, tells the story of a battle long ago, how she stood at the gates with only 2 retainers and held off a dozen raiders. She doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't boast, but her fingers twitch when she mentions the blade, and you wonder how many nights she's dreamed of blood. You begin to understand. Martial training wasn't about being aggressive, it was about being prepared. These women were expected to be soft-spoken and steel-spined. Their lives weren't about glory, they were about endurance. And still many of these girls would grow up, marry, raise children, and never draw that hidden blade. Their names would vanish from the scrolls, their stories left to family gossip and embroidered fables. But their readiness, that was real. A scroll tucked into a lacquered box reveals something curious. The household ledger includes payments for weapons training, archery supplies, and new lacquer for polems. In other words, the clan invested in its daughters, defense as much as its sons. No, they weren't equal, but they weren't powerless either. You exit the courtyard as dusk falls, and you hear laughter again, young voices, teasing each other about who fell hardest in today's sparring match. You smile, because behind the fans and folded sleeves lies a quiet revolution, and if you think they won't use that naginata, well, you just try raiding the rice stores and find out. You follow the sound of sandals slapping against gravel as the courtyard fades behind you, replaced now by the low hum of a different age. The air thickens with incense, and the wind tugs at paper lanterns bearing clan crests. Time has slipped. Forward, it's the Kamakura period. Now late 12th century, and Japan is a patchwork of rival lords, hungry clans, and war-dusted roads. Here, from the sheltered estates of noble daughters, something new begins to rise. The Onna-Bugeisha. The term may sound ceremonial, but you quickly learn it's anything but. These women are warriors, not in theory, not in poetry, but in real armor with real blades. They are daughters of samurai households, trained not just to defend, but to fight, to ride, to bleed, and to lead. You're standing beside a field where a group of women spar with wooden naginata, the staff blade whistling through air with every strike. They wear layered garments for training, but off to the side, resting on wooden racks, lies the real thing: jidoroi armor, lacquered chest plates, and conical helmets with crests fashioned like birds in flight. One woman older, her face calm, but scarred, corrects a younger warrior's stance with the flat of her blade. Your feet remember faster than your mind, she says. The younger one nods, adjusts, strikes again. Better this time. The rhythm returns. The Onna-Bugeisha weren't just isolated heroines. They were a class, a category, a living contradiction in a world that preferred its women hidden behind screens. They studied kenjutsu, horsemanship, and battlefield strategy. They learned to read war scrolls and draw maps. Their teachers, sometimes fathers, sometimes older sisters, and sometimes retired killers in disguise as nannies. Historians still argue. Whether their numbers were significant or symbolic, there are hundreds of them, thousands, or were the few names that survived simply rare exceptions? But one thing's clear: they existed, and they were feared. One battle account tells of a woman who defended her home for 3 days while her husband was away, personally killing for attackers. Her name doesn't appear in official war records, but a poem written by her grandson compares her to a dragon who wore perfume. You suspect that's not metaphor. You step into the family shrine, where ancestral swords lie beside prayer beads. A weathered scroll lists the names of household members who died in combat. 4 are men, 2 are women, equal in ink, equal in silence. Now, here's your fringe tidbit of the evening. A few rare clan scrolls mention reverse armor. Women disguised themselves as male warriors by wearing bulkier chest plates and binding their hair under false crests. These tricks worked well until they didn't. One anecdote involves an enemy samurai refusing to fight him, only to later realize he was the woman he once proposed marriage to. Oops, the naginata, long associated with these warrior women, wasn't just a battlefield weapon, it was a statement. The long reach allowed them to hold back charging opponents with powerful sweeping strikes. Symbolically, it also kept attackers at a distance, perfect for a gender expected to defend, not chase. But you begin to notice that the most seasoned women in this group, they don't just defend, they advance. One leads a mock cavalry drill on a borrowed horse, shouting commands with ease. Another draws battle maps in the dirt with the butt of her spear. A third sharpens a blade while murmuring a lullaby likely more for herself than any child. And just beside the training hall, you spot something quietly powerful, a calligraphy scroll that reads, "Strength lies in still water." It hangs, not above the men's dojo, but in the women's dot. It's easy to imagine these women being mocked, underestimated, dismissed. But they trained anyway, they led anyway, they fought anyway. And sometimes, when no man was left to protect the estate, they took command of entire garrisons. One tale describes a woman who tricked an invading force into thinking she was a full regiment by lighting fires along every ridge and riding her horse in wide circles. Classic bluff, completely effective. And now you're starting to get it. The Onna-Bugeisha were not just rare exceptions to the samurai code, they were part of it. A secret chapter, a necessary balance. You sit at the edge of the veranda as a bell tolls in the distance. The warriors pack up their practice gear and bow to their instructors. Sunset casts long shadows across the field, making the naginata gleam gold for just a second. It's quiet again, almost peaceful, but that's still water. It's deeper than you think. You wake to a sharp breeze and the distant thunder of hooves. The landscape has changed. Gone are the peaceful courtyards and quiet dojos. Now you're amid the dust and blood of civil war, the Genpei War, late 12th century. 2 great clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, clash for control of Japan. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, steel, and desperation. And in the chaos, a figure emerges, Tomoe Gozen. Yes, that Tomoe. You hear her before you see her. Galloping across the battlefield, a war cry slicing through the morning mist. She's clad in full Gigoroi armor, her long black hair streaming behind her like a battle standard. Her naginata gleams red not from the sunrise. She's all ready. Drawn blood. Tomoe Gozen is no background legend. Her story appears in the 14th century, chronicled the tale of the hike, where she's described as especially beautiful, with white skin, long hair, and charming features. Classic. But then the text swerves. It says she's also a peerless archer, a swordswoman strong enough to match 1,000 men, and brave enough to face demons or gods. Now we're talking. You ride with her into the thick of the fray. The Genpei War was not a noble chess match. It was brutal, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Villages were razed, rivers ran red, and Tomoe, she didn't fight beside the men, she fought better than most of them. One tale tells how she decapitated a famous warrior and presented the head to her commander as calmly as if she were offering tea. And yet, for all her glory, her legend is tinged with shadows. Historians still argue whether she was real or mythologized. Some believe she was inserted into the story later to add dramatic flair. Others say she was one of many female warriors, simply the only one whose name slipped through the cracks of history. You lean in now, watching her lead a charge against the Tira forces. Her horse surges forward as arrows rain down like needle-tipped snow. She shouts, "Follow me if you dare." And several men hesitate. You don't. At the Battle of Awazu, Tomoe reportedly killed a renowned warrior named Honda no Morishige. She dismounted him with a single strike, wrestled him to the ground, and, despite his full armor, cut off his head. Try doing that with a naginata while wearing 60 pounds of lacquered armor. You can't even carry 2 grocery bags without needing a break, and then, just as suddenly, she's gone. One version says her commander, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, told her to leave the battlefield before his final doomed charge. He wanted to die with honor, not beside a woman. Another version says she disobeyed and died fighting. Still another says she lived, became a nun, and wandered the country in mourning. You choose the version you like best. Personally, you suspect she survived and simply vanished before history could write her out. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. Some 17th century kabuki plays portrayed Tomoe as a ghost cursed to wander battlefields in full armor, still seeking glory. One even has her possessing a tea-house hostess and challenging male guests to duels between sips of sake. Frankly, she'd win. You find yourself at a shrine built centuries later in her honor. A small one tucked between cedar trees, barely known to tourists. An old woman sweeps the steps and nods at you. You know her name, she asks softly. You nod, she smiles. Then she's not gone. You sit beneath the trees and run your fingers over the carved name, Bayutane. Tomoe Gozen. And as cicadas cry overhead, you realize something strange. The more you learn about her, the less certain you are about who she really was. A warrior, a symbol, a ghost, maybe all three, but you're sure of this: she fought. She chose battle, and she carved her place into a world that tried to forget her. You rise, the dust of the battlefield still clinging to your imagination. One last thought lingers in the wind. How many more like her never made it into the scrolls? The battlefield fades, silence returns, and yet something gnaws at the edge of your thoughts. You've just ridden through fire and legend beside Tomoe Gozen. So, where is she now? Why does her story end so abruptly? Why, after such ferocity, does she vanish? You wander into the aftermath of the Genpei War, where banners hang limp, ash settles into the cracks of scorched wood, and silence clings like a second skin. The Minamoto clan has triumphed. The first shogunate is born, peace tenuous and bloodiest declared. And Tomoe, you search the chronicles. You comb the family registers, the temple offerings, the death rolls. She's barely there. What little remains feels half-whispered. Some say she was captured after the war, spared because of her beauty, and forced into marriage. Others claim she became a nun, tending to war orphans and praying beside cold riverbanks. A more fringe account, half poem and half prayer, suggests she roamed the forests like a ghost, dressed in the torn remains of her armor, living off roots and vengeance. Historians still argue whether her silence was enforced or chosen. Did the shogunate erase her name to preserve a more honorable image of male victory? Or did she, in some quiet rebellion, choose obscurity over courtly comfort? You sit beside a dying fire as an old monk murmurs tales he heard in his youth. They say she never aged, he rasps, that she cut her own hair short and trained girls in secret. They say you can still hear her in the clash of practice blades on rainy nights. You smile, you want to believe it. Here's your quirky footnote for tonight. One 18th century scroll from a remote mountain shrine lists Tomoe as a minor household deity protector of widows, travelers, and women with blades. A local priest tried to ban the practice. The statue kept reappearing. Eventually, they just left it alone. You continue your journey, stepping into a Kyoto temple that houses relics from the Genpei era. Behind glass lies a helmet small, black lacquered, with plum blossoms carved into the cheek guards. No name, no plaque, just a note, possibly female. You press your forehead to the glass and wonder, is this hers? Because here's the thing, after Tomoe's last battle, the scrolls go quiet. You'd think she'd inspire a wave of imitators. But what follows isn't a surge of female warriors. It's a return to silence, a return to roles. Women retreat behind folding screens, into poems and piety. The naginata becomes less battlefield tool, more household ornament, and yet it never fully disappears. You find a faded illustration in a back room of the temple, painted long after the Genpei War. It shows a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her armor discarded at her feet. She looks out over the sea, holding only a single hairpin. The caption reads, "The warrior who forgot her name." You feel the chill of wind against your skin, because that trite there is the tragedy of Tomoe Gozen. Not that she fought, not even that she vanished, but that her legend became optional, as if history couldn't quite decide what to do with her. And here's the cruelest irony. The more revered she became in plays, scrolls, and romantic retellings, the less real she became. The samurai code remembered her beauty, her loyalty, her tragic departure, but not her victories. You lean back and imagine a woman alone in her old-aged calloused hands, a blunt dagger hidden in her obi, watching the next generation pretend she never existed. Would she have laughed, or would she have sharpened her blade in silence? One final whisper before the scene fades. In some remote villages, grandmothers still warn their sons, "Don't marry a girl with Gozen eyes, she outfight you in your sleep." You smile. She's still out there, in rumors, in riddles, in every girl who trains with a weapon and never apologizes for being strong. The air shifts again. Gone is the clang of steel and the war drum thunder of battlefield glory. You now find yourself standing inside a candlelit chamber noble household in the Edo period, early 1600s. Outside, peace reigns. The Tokugawa shogunate has unified Japan, and for the first time in centuries, swords are silent. The land, it seems, has settled. But you quickly realize something chilling. The silence is not safety. Inside the house, behind screens and fragrant incense, live the wives, daughters and widows of samurai families. Their husbands may no longer ride into war, but danger has simply shifted shape. Instead of invaders at the gates, now there are betrayals within the walls. Poisoned tea, nighttime intrusions, power plays disguised as arranged marriages, and the women, they are ready. You walk the tatami mats of a samurai mansion and notice the little details. A decorative box beside the bed not for jewelry, but for a keikan, a short razor-sharp dagger. A writing desk that opens not just to calligraphy, scrolls, but to emergency escape maps of the estate. A child's doll with a hollow core perfect for hiding a small blade or message scroll. This is not paranoia, it is protocol. By this point in history, the role of women in samurai society has narrowed. No more open battlefields, no riding into war with naginata in hand. Instead, you're expected to be a loyal wife, a quiet mother, and an elegant hostess. But should anyone threaten your family's honor, your duty is clear: kill or die trying. Historians still argue whether these women truly expected to act or whether their ritual training was more symbolic than practical. But one Idawara manual, written for samurai wives, instructs: if you cannot flee with the heir, die beside him. Comforting bedtime reading, You now enter a side room, daima, quieter. An older woman is teaching her daughter-in-law how to fall silently. Not how to faint, but how to strike and collapse in the same breath. In case he's stronger than you, she explains. This way, you can cut him on the way down. You swallow hard. It turns out that female warriors did not vanish in peace. They adapted. War gave way to political assassinations, rival clan plots, internal betrayals. Wives had to defend household secrets, protect poisoned husbands from rival spies, and if all else failed, take their own lives with dignity. You now understand the terrifying grace of the Jagai. Ah yes, Jagai, the female counterpart to male. Seppuku, while men disemboweled themselves with long blades, women tied their knees and ankles together and used the keikon to slash the throat. The purpose, to die beautifully, without exposing the body. You shudder at the ritualistic precision. And here's the thing. Girls learned it by 12. Your quirky tidbit for the evening. Some noble women reportedly kept their suicide dagger sharpened beside their makeup brushes. One Tokugawa diary mentions a woman who etched poetry into the blade itself so that if her body were found, her final words would be visible in blood and steel. You step into the private shrine of a widow. Offerings sit beside the image of a stern-looking man in armor, and just in front of his likeness, nestled beneath the incense bowl, is a faded silk sash with bloodstains long dried. You don't ask questions. It's said that during house arrests, or during periods of family disgrace, the wives were expected to uphold honor more fiercely than the men. If a samurai failed, his wife might take her own life first as both punishment and example. This wasn't romantic. It was cold, terrifying. Duty, and yet, some women turned these rules on their heads. One little-known case involves a samurai wife who, after her husband's unjust execution, gathered her children and secretly trained them in weapons for a decade. When her son came of age, they overthrew the corrupt lord who'd ordered the betrayal. She lived long enough to see her enemies kneel. Was she punished? Not at all. She became an advisor to the new daimyo. Local legend calls her the Widow General. No official records exist, but locals still leave flowers at her family grave. So, no, these women weren't idle. They weren't weak. They were waiting, studying, memorizing layouts, teaching their daughters, and even in peace, they kept their blades within reach. You step outside into the moonlight. Somewhere in the quiet, a wind chime tinkles softly, but you know better now. That gentle melody, it's hiding steel. You step from the quiet garden into a darker corridor. The paper walls are thinner here, more fragile, but what lies beyond them is anything but delicate. Tonight, you're peeking into the private world of samurai women in the Edo period. Just wives and widows, but guardians of the household, silently lethal and endlessly composed. These aren't women who run onto battlefields with war cries. These are the ones who wait, watch, and, if needed, kill. Welcome to the world of weapons beneath the kimono. You're seated in a dressing room now. A servant combs through thick hair, fixing it into an elaborate updo. She adds ornamental pins, kanzashi, lacquered petals and delicate cranes. Lovely, right? Wrong. The middle pin, hollow and needle-sharp, coated in a sticky brown poison extracted from crushed cherry seeds. One scratch could paralyze a man in minutes. You blink. The servant smiles politely. All daughters receive one on their 15th birthday. You're starting to notice a pattern as peace extended across the land. Women in the samurai class weren't allowed to be warriors, but they weren't allowed to be helpless either. That left a narrow, silent space, and in that space they became experts in concealment. You walk through the estate now, noting where things are not as they seem. That beautiful folding fan, lined with iron spokes, strong enough to break a jaw. That hair comb has a hidden blade that unsheathes with a flick of the thumb. The obi, the wide silk sash wrapped tightly around the waist, often conceals a tonto dagger, nestled so snug. You wouldn't know it was there until the woman suddenly wasn't smiling anymore. Historians still argue whether these items were carried daily or only in times of threat. But diaries from the period mention adjusting the blade before breakfast and removing the pin before prayer, which suggests they weren't just symbolic. You pause at a tea ceremony. Everything is hushed, meticulous, but one of the women serving turns slightly, and beneath her obi, the faint glint of metal winks from within the folds. You pretend not to see. She pretends not to know you saw. That's the game. Here's a tidbit so strange it borders on satire. Some estate records show inventories listing dancers' sleeves, poisoned pins, fan blades, and hair traps. Hair traps, yes. A tool resembling a braided rope, disguised as a hair extension, which could be looped and tightened around an intruder's neck from behind. The ultimate silent takedown, stylish and deadly. Now step into the women's quarters. This is where things get even more complicated. While samurai men had the privilege of open conflict, their wives fought their own battles in shadows, defending the honor of the house, protecting children, and navigating brutal clan politics. Some of the most dangerous threats came not from outsiders, but from within. Jealous rivals, scheming cousins, embittered servants. So every woman was trained, quietly, to be a sentinel. And if her husband was accused of treason, if he was ordered to commit seppuku, then it was her responsibility to maintain the family's honor. That might mean raising their son to avenge the name, or it might mean using that ornamental pin for something far more final. You hear the soft scrape of metal on lacquer as a woman sharpens a blade by candlelight. She's humming. The song is gentle, almost childlike, but the dagger in her hand gleams like moonlight on bone. And what if a woman had no husband to avenge? What if she never married? Then she might serve as a guardian to the household. One late period account tells of a woman who ran a whole estate's defense from behind a screen. Her orders were carried out by armed servants, but no one dared question her command. Why? Because rumor had it she once dispatched a rival lord's spy by slipping a snake into his futon. The snake, named after her ex-fiancé Charming. You glance back at the armor rack in the estate's shrine. It's modest, just a chest plate and helmet, clearly never worn in war. But beside it rests a weathered tanto, its blade engraved with kanji that read, "A woman's hand, a warrior's will." And there it is, the secret philosophy of this silent war, that grace and lethality were not opposites, they were sisters, tied at the waist. As you step back into the moonlight, a breeze lifts the corner of your sleeve. You half expect to find a hidden blade tucked there. Maybe you do, or maybe you've simply learned where to look. Either way, you don't feel unarmed anymore. Dawn breaks over frost-covered rooftops, and now you're marching under a pale winter sky. The smoke of wood fires coils through pine forests, but it isn't the scent of comfort, it's the smell of war. Again, you're heading north, into the snow-draped heartland of Isu, a fiercely loyal domain during the dying days of the Tokugawa shogunate. It's 1868, the start of the Boshin War, and samurai glory is unraveling. The old order is dying. Gunpowder is replacing the sword. Western uniforms clash with lacquered armor, and once more, women are taking up blades. You find yourself at the gates of Suruga Castle, where a group of women, armored, focused, and unflinching, prepare for battle. They are not legends from the past. They are real, recent, breathing, mothers, daughters, wives, dressed not in ceremonial garb, but in ashmide armor, wielding naginata as if born with them. This is the Joshigan, or Women's Army, of Isu. You wouldn't believe it if you hadn't seen it with your own eyes. Young girls stuffing wadding into muskets, elderly women grinding dried rice for ration cakes, and in the middle of them all, a dozen women sparring with short blades and deadly intent. Their commander, a woman in her 20s, a teacher by trade, a killer by necessity. She adjusts her helmet with practiced ease. "We fight because we must," she says, "and we do not apologize." These women are not officially sanctioned soldiers. In fact, the imperial army marching against them considers the very idea of armed women insulting. Historians still argue whether the Joshigan were formally organized or an impromptu militia, but first-hand accounts describe their discipline, formations, and kills. These were not panicked civilians. They were warriors. You walk the perimeter of the castle, with one of them a widow who lost her husband to an earlier skirmish. She carries to Tonto, one for the enemy, one for herself. She smiles grimly. "If they breach the wall, I'll use both." And that wasn't bravado. That was standard procedure. The siege of Suruga Castle lasts nearly a month. Inside, women haul water, smuggle messages, cook rice balls for the fighters. But more than once, they also pick up spears and defend breached corridors. One young woman reportedly killed a saber-wielding officer with a fire poker when he broke through a side door. Afterward, she helped patch the roof. Here's a fringe detail from a temple registry in Isu. It notes that a group of women brought a crate of family heirlooms to the monks, asking them to hide the items until the guns are gone. Among the items were 3 swords, a lacquered helmet, and a baby's footprint pressed into clay. The war wasn't just about honor, it was about legacy. The castle eventually falls. Of course, the Meiji forces are too many, too modern, too relentless. But even in retreat, the story of the women warriors spreads, not through official bulletins, but through whispered awe. One imperial soldier reportedly refused to fight near the inner walls, saying, "There are demons in silk within." After the surrender, most records of the women's unit are quietly buried. Their role is downplayed. Some call them hysterical civilians. Others claim their involvement was shameful. But decades later, as old women, a few survivors write their memoirs. One of them, a former calligrapher, pens a single-line poem that sends chills down your spine. "I did not survive to be remembered as obedient. You stand now in a quiet courtyard where the castle once stood. Snow falls lightly. A bronze statue of a male warrior dominates the center. But if you look closely, just to the side, there's a small plaque in the ground almost hidden beneath. A hedge. It bears no name, just a single engraved phrase, Hosigun no Tameni. For the women's army." You kneel there a moment, brushing away the snow, because they may have fought from behind the walls, but they fought, and they didn't ask permission. The snow still clings to your sleeves as you walk farther into the war-ravaged heart of Azubat now. The clamor fades, and only one name echoes in the hush. Nakano Takeko. She is not just a warrior, she is the warrior commander of her own unit, trained in both literature and lethal force, daughter of samurai, master of the naginata, a teacher turned soldier, and perhaps the last true Onna-Bugeisha Japan ever saw. And now you're standing on the eve of her final battle. The year is still 1868. The Boshin War is grinding toward its bitter climax, and the imperial army descends on the city of Aizu like a storm of black powder and political promises. Nakano Takeko is just 21 years old, but when others hesitate, she steps forward, officially, of course, because the imperial commanders forbid women from fighting in the ranks. So she raises her own banner, forms her own squad, writes her own rules. They fight under a white standard with a red mountain lily symbol of purity and resilience. You watch her stitch it by lantern light, her needle trembling only slightly. "We'll die with beauty," she murmurs, if not with recognition. You walk beside her down the mountain trail where she drills her small unit, mostly teenage girls, widows, and a few veteran swordmistresses. They wear mismatched armor, family hand-me-downs, and blackened lacquer plate, but they move with discipline, with fire, with something that makes your breath hitch. Takeko trains her girls hard. One practice involves rolling under low ropes while striking imaginary enemies. Another, running uphill with weighted wooden poles until their legs scream. "No one will give you mercy," she says, "so don't expect it." Historians still argue whether the Jeijitai, her women's volunteer corps, was formally endorsed or merely tolerated. The Meiji government would later minimize their contributions, but contemporary eyewitnesses, startled villagers, fellow fighters, even enemy soldiers, described seeing women in full armor on the front line, and she didn't just fight, she led. You now stand beside her on the front line at the Battle of Izuwa Komotsu. Gunfire rips through the air, shogunate flags burn, horses scream, and in the middle of it all, Takeko advances with her naginata gleaming. She cuts down soldier after soldier with brutal elegance, thrust, spin, sweep. The long blade dances like a serpent in her hands. One witness wrote that she moved as if possessed by the spirit of 10 men. Another swore she struck down 5 enemies in under a minute. Your heart pounds as you watch her fight, not wildly, but with method. Like a calligraphy stroke practiced 1,000 times, and then a musket shot. It hits her in the chest. She falls to one knee, but doesn't cry out. Instead, she orders her sister, Yiko, to take her head and bury it so the enemy can't claim it as a trophy. Let that sink in. She planned her own decapitation. That was the code of honor. Yiko obeys. With tears and trembling hands, she carries her sister's head through the chaos, past fires and screams, and buries it beneath a pine tree in the courtyard of the Hakaiji temple. You kneel there now. Beside that tree, the grave is modest. A stone marker, a few weathered offerings, but around it grow the same red lilies that once flew on her banner. And now your quirky tidbit for the night. After Takeko's death, a local girl composed a haunting lullaby about her bravery. It was banned during early Meiji rule, but survived in oral form, passed down secretly between mothers and daughters like an heirloom. One line remains etched in memory. She danced with the wind and died with the moon. You rise slowly, feeling the weight of her legend pressing into your chest. Nakano Takeko did not ask for glory. She asked to defend her people. She never became a general, never wrote a memoir. But today, her story is taught in Aisu schools, and every year, local girls parade in armor in her honor. And here's the thing. You don't need to exaggerate her tale. You don't need myth or magic. Her truth is already more powerful than fiction, because she knew she wouldn't be remembered like the men, and she fought anyway. The fire has gone out. The banners have fallen. Izu is quiet now, its fields blanketed with ash and silence. But as you walk through its ruined halls, a new kind of storm brews, not of arrows or musket smoke, but of pens and proclamations. The Meiji Restoration is here, and it is merciless in more ways than one. This time, the battlefield is the historical record. You enter a chamber lined with scrolls, inkstones, and scribes dressed in formal black. They do not wield swords. They wield control of memory, of legacy, of what is and what was. Their brushstrokes decide who gets remembered as a hero and who gets erased. And guess what? The women start disappearing. You sit across from a Meiji bureaucrat as he edits a battle log. His hand hesitates briefly above a name, Yeko, the sister, who buried Nakano Takeko's head. He strikes it through with careful precision. Too messy, too emotional. To female, another entry. Unknown women assisted in medical supply transport. You recognize the names behind that phrase. Warriors who bled in armor. But assisted is the word that stays. You feel it now, the deliberate softening of truth, the rebranding. These women weren't erased outright. No, that would be too obvious. They were reframed, turned from fighters into support staff, from soldiers into symbols, from leaders into loyal wives. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or simply a byproduct of male-centered culture. Maybe both. But what's clear is that the further Japan modernized, the more uncomfortable it became with women who had once stood sword to sword with samurai men. You now stand before a museum display in Tokyo. Behind glass are antique labeled ceremonial. One blade belonged to a known Onna-Bugeisha, but the placard skips her name entirely. Just example of female weaponry during feudal era. She fought, she died. She's now an example. You sigh. Here's your quirky detail for tonight. In 1907, a schoolgirl discovered a bundle of letters hidden inside the wall of her grandmother's house. They were love letters between two female warriors who fought in Izu. The letters spoke of battle plans, cherry blossoms, and shared dreams of dying together with honor. The girl tried to publish them. The editor replied, "Too fictional. not suitable for women's journals. And so, the erasure wasn't just about battle. It was about identity, about power, about saying you didn't belong here even when there was blood on the naginata to prove otherwise. You drift through the archives now, tracing your fingers over dusty scrolls. Some are faded, others are intentionally blank whole pages removed, burned, or rewritten. An old monk walks past and shrugs. History is just the part we choose to remember, he mutters. But not all the women were erased. Some lived long enough to tell their own truths quietly. One former warrior became a calligraphy teacher and wrote poems about summer storms and stubborn lilies. Another opened a noodle shop and taught her daughters to shoot bows behind the house. The authorities never knew. In some rural temples, you spot offerings not to male war gods but to female ancestors who, according to oral tradition, once guarded the valley alone during famine. You light a stick of incense and wonder what their names were. No plaques, no scrolls, just whispers, and then a glimmer. In a forgotten temple alcove, behind dust-covered statues, a box wrapped in old silk. You open it slowly. Inside is a woman's helmet, plum, blossom crest, lacquer chipped, blood-dark stains at the chin. No label, no story. But you know, because even if the scribes forgot, the steel did not. The weapon remembers, the soil remembers, and tonight's do you. You step out of the shrine and into dusk. The air hangs heavy with the scent of moss and old paper. Somewhere far away, a wooden bell tolls. But you're not leaving this story behind. You're diving deeper into the spaces between the scrolls, into the training grounds that never made it into textbooks. Not all warriors lived in castles. Not all dojos kept clean records. And not all students were boys. You walk now along the edge of a mist-draped valley, nestled between two hills, nearly swallowed by cedar and bamboo, lies a crumbling private dojalong, abandoned, but still whispering through the wind. You step over the threshold, and the cracked tatami creaks under your feet. This is where girls trained in secretus, especially those whose families didn't support it, or those who had too much to avenge and not enough permission to do so. Their names lost, but their footwork patterns still linger, etched into the floor. You see faint charcoal sketches on the walls, forms of movement, anatomy of strikes, strange notes written in old kana. One reads, "The spirit enters before the blade." Another simply says, "He will not expect the second strike." Chilling, isn't it? Historians still argue whether these underground dojos were widespread or isolated anomalies. Some say they were just legends. But in rural prefectures, Niigata, Shimane, Tottori, there are tales passed down of ghost schools, where daughters trained beside shadows, often by moonlight, sometimes under the guidance of retired women warriors who had disappeared from public view, and some say these schools had other teachers, too. You pause now. Did you hear that? A clatter, a footstep. But no one's there. Because in these tales, it's not just living women who teach. Some villagers say the spirits of fallen Onna-Bugeisha returned to train new generations. They were called yurei, no sense of a ghost instructors. Girls would leave offerings, dried persimmons, strands of black hair, slivers of polished obsidian. In return, they claimed their practice blades would feel guided, like invisible hands correcting their forms. Do you believe it? You move deeper into the ruin, brushing aside a shoshi door half-eaten by time. A rack of practice weapons still leans. Against the back wall, bamboo-sheathed naginata, short wooden daggers. A child's practice, Yumi-bowed string snapped decades ago. Nearby sits a water jar shaped like a tiger, and inside it, tucked into a cloth bundle, a scroll with instructions on how to bind your chest and disguise your voice. Not just for war. For blending in, these girls didn't want to be known. They wanted to be ready. You step back outside into the humid night. The frogs chirp. The breeze carries the soft thunk of a wooden post struck by a phantom blade. You almost laugh, but then again, maybe not. This place feels alive, even in ruin. And now your quirky tidbit of the night. There's an obscure mid-Dido folktale about a cursed dojo run entirely by women, where any man who entered would be found days later. Live, yes, but missing all knowledge of combat, his muscle memory wiped clean. The tale ends with a warning. Never test the patience of women who train in silence. You chuckle, not bad for folklore. But then you remember the floor patterns, the ones still visible beneath dust. You recognize them now. The same drills taught in elite military academies. The same that your tour guide back in Kyoto insisted were male-only traditions. Funny, these girls knew them centuries ago, and now the moon rises. The dojo glows. Silver. You bow once at the threshold, just in case someone's still watching, because this isn't just the story of warriors. It's the story of persistence, even when no one is looking, especially then. The moon has climbed higher now, casting silver veins across cobbled alleyways. You step out of the forested hills and into a lantern-lit district humming with the music of flutes and the soft laughter of courtesans. But don't let the silks and painted smiles fool you. Tonight, you're in the red light district of Yoshiwara. You're not here for perfume and poetry. You're here to meet women who were far more than they seemed. Because in the lacquered shadow of tea houses and pleasure rooms, you'll find something unexpected. Courtesans turned bodyguards. You slip past a curtain into the inner quarters of a high-ranking oiran. Her room is a world of color-folding screens painted with dragons, cushions stacked like fortresses, and incense burning in a coiled brass serpent. The woman seated before you has her hair sculpted into an elaborate tower, her mouth tinted crimson, her fingers covered in rings. She is beautiful. She is quiet. She is watching you like a hawk. This oiran is no common entertainer. Before she entered this world, she was the daughter of a disgraced samurai trained in kenjutsu and survival. When her family fell into debt, she was sold to the pleasure houses. But she never forgot her training. And now she is a protector, not of the state, but of her own. You hear it whispered through the room. Many courtesans, especially the high ones, were taught to defend themselves, not just from drunken clients or jealous rivals, but from spies, assassins, and corrupted lords. The Yoshiwara district was full of secrets. Information passed like sake, and women like her knew how to listen and strike when needed. Historians still argue whether these bodyguard courtesans were organized or just rare exceptions. But certain scrolls red-listed, unofficial histories copied in secret mention women who worked both blade and bedding, who passed messages between domains and silenced men who said too much. You lean closer now, watching as she carefully sets down her fan. In her obi is a hidden blader, narrow tanto with no guard, blackened so it doesn't gleam. Beside it, a hairpin coated in something far too dark to be mere lacquer, and your quirky tidbit for the evening. There's a long-held rumor in Edo gossip scrolls that one particularly notorious oiran had an entire library of poisons disguised as perfume bottles. 1 whiff would soothe, 2, sleep, 3, a very sudden silence. They called her the Night Doctor. She vanished after one of her clients, Demio, dropped dead mid. Funny, that. But it wasn't always revenge. Sometimes, these women worked in partnership with other female warriors. A visiting nun, a temple maid, a traveling seller of fabrics. All of them part of a quiet network, passing scrolls, moving gold, slipping weapons, past checkpoints under layers of brocade. You walk the back alleys now and pass a group of lower-ranking Yujo, laughing over rice and tea. One of them pauses to adjust her sandaland. You spot the glint of a metal fan tucked under her kimono sash. These weren't women waiting to be rescued. These were women armed by necessity, trained by trauma, sharpened by survival. You reach the far end of the district now, where an old woman tends a lantern post. Her back is bent, her hands spotted with age, but she still moves like someone who once held a blade. You ask if she remembers the bodyguard courtesans. She just grins. I was one, you blink. I've opened more throats than sack bottles. She says softly, almost kindly, but I always bowed first. Then she walks away into the fog, leaving you with the sound of your own heartbeat, because in this district, the sharpest weapons were not always visible. Some were tucked behind a smile, hidden in a sleeve, or laced into the last kiss of the night. The lanterns fade behind you now, their glow swallowed by the night. The streets grow quieter, more rural. The gravel underfoot is looser, and the wind carries the scent of mulberry and rain-damp straw. You're no longer in a place with printed maps or official records. You've entered the realm of forgotten tales, the ones passed down in secret, wrapped in cloth, or whispered between shrine maidens and old widows. This is the world of the hidden scrolls. You step into a tiny mountain shrine. Its paint has faded. Its steps are cracked, and the only thing keeping it upright seems to be memory. But inside, a treasure. Not gold, not relics, but stories, scrolls, tucked behind altar drawers. Fragile paper folded and tucked into ceramic jars. Some are so brittle you hardly dare touch them. Others have clearly been copied and recopied by hand across generations. All of them tales of female warriors. Not emperors, not generals, just women. Names you've never heard, but their stories are raw and polished, unfiltered and vivid. One scroll tells of a temple nun who led a group of orphans in defending a valley during a bandit siege. Another speaks of two sisters who disguised themselves as traveling entertainers to assassinate a corrupt official. There's even a tale written in painfully neat handwriting about a farmer's wife who carried out a 20-year vendetta, training her children in secret until the time was right. You blink at that one. A little dramatic, maybe, but you read it twice. Historians still argue whether these hidden scrolls are folklore or fact. Many contain contradictions, fantastical elements, or impossible timelines. But then again, so do most official histories. And unlike those, these stories feel personal. They don't glorify war. They don't polish the edges. They tell of fear, rage, cold nights, and bloody hands. They tell of strength earned in silence. You now examine a peculiar scroll sealed with wax and bound in embroidered silk. When you unroll it, you find something unexpected. A training manual, not for battle, but for espionage. The calligraphy is crisp, the ink preserved. It details how to fake a fainting spell, how to plant a letter without being noticed, how to dislocate a man's thumb with a single well-timed handshake. It's signed only with a brush mark shaped like a swallow in flight. Your quirky detail tonight. One scroll contains a recipe for rice cakes, laced with a paralyzing agent derived from camellia leaves. The instructions are oddly precise. Almost too precise. You wonder if someone ever tested it, and who the cake was meant for. You sit now in the shrine's shadow, moonlight pooling on the floor. Behind you, old wood creaks, as if settling into place after decades of holding breath. One faded scroll, barely readable, contains a prayer written by a dying warrior woman. I do not ask for songs or statues, only that my blade not rust in memory. That hits you, doesn't it? Because this is where most stories go to die in private, unpublished, unofficial, uncelebrated. These women didn't crave honor, they craved safety. They fought not for fame, but because no one else would, and as you rise to leave, you pass a final scroll near the altar. The paper is smeared with ink, the brushwork frantic. It's a list of names. Most are crossed out, but one written in a child's handwriting is circled with care. It reads, "I will remember you." You bow deeply, scroll still clutched in your hand, because tonight you remember them. The women who trained in the shadows, the sisters who fought and fell and vanished, the ones who were never meant to be found. You awaken to birdsong not in a forest or a fortress, but in a simple village courtyard ringed with wooden homes and crooked garden fences. Children run barefoot across packed dirt, chasing each other with sticks that double as imaginary spears. Laundry flaps in the wind. The scene is almost tranquil, almost because here, among the mortar bowls and rice baskets, the women are preparing for war of a different kind, not one of conquest, but of protection. And their weapons are well you're standing right beside. One, a broomstick polished smooth at the grip and weighted with stone at the end. This is the world of mothers, midwives, and martial arts. You step into a small home where a woman in her 50s ties back her hair with a strip of cloth. She's stern, weather-worn, and judging by the stance she just took, deadly. Her target, a young girl, maybe 11, gripping a practiced dagger with both hands. They spar in bursts, quick, sharp, focused. The girl's foot slips. The woman corrects her with a swift tap to the ribs and a grunt. Balance comes from your back foot, not your pride. Welcome to the other dojo, the one without titles or scrolls. Just skills handed down in kitchens and birthing rooms, by women who knew that danger didn't wait for permission. Historians still argue whether martial training among commoner women was widespread or rare. There are few official documents, but oral histories, especially in rural areas, speak often of grandmothers with strange scars, of mothers who could kill a rat with a chopstick, and midwives who knew which herbs could dull pain or stop a heart. You visit the home of a healer next. She shows you her satchel, linen bandages, powdered bark, dried persimmons, and a tonto blade, blackened with age. For wolves, she says with a wink. You get the sense she doesn't mean the four-legged kind. The line between caregiver and combatant blurs quickly here. You learn that during local peasant uprisings or bandit attacks, it was the women who organized defense, hiding children, laying traps, sometimes even donning their husband's armor while he lay injured. In one 18th century village, a group of midwives reportedly led a successful defense of a rice granary, wielding farming tools and throwing boiling water from the roofs. When the magistrate arrived, the attackers were gone and the granary untouched. The women offered him tea like nothing had happened. Here's your quirky tidbit. A regional folktale tells of a rice farmer's wife who, during a tax riot, stood atop a fence post and declared herself general of the grains. She led a march of apron-clad women into the local magistrate's estate and demanded fairer prices. No one was harmed, but the magistrate reportedly fainted from sheer intimidation. You visit another home where three sisters practice with weighted cloth sashes, spinning them like ropes, whipping targets pinned to the wall. One wears a baby on her back while she trains. The child gurgles happily, oblivious. You ask the eldest sister why they train. She shrugs, because the men don't always come back, and that's the heart of it. These women weren't preparing for glory. They were preparing for absence. When husbands were away fighting, or drunk, or dead, the family didn't stop needing protection. Bandits didn't pause. Wild dogs didn't wait. So the women of the household became both shield and sword, without ceremony. You walk past one last courtyard as the sun sets. A woman sits cross-legged, teaching a small boy how to cook rice. Next to her, another child practices a kata with a wooden stick. To skills, equally essential, because in this world, feeding your family and fighting for them were both sacred acts. The samurai scrolls may not mention these women, but the rice grew, the babies lived, the homes stood, and somewhere in the back of a cupboard, wrapped in old cloth, there was always a blade, just in case. The path tightens, now twisting through rocky hills, winding past shrines so small they barely cast a shadow. The trees here seem to listen, the air thick with secrets. You're entering eager province, birthplace of whispers, where blades strike from rooftops and vanish before they echo. And if you've heard of ninja, you've probably imagined silent men in black masks. But tonight, you're walking in the footsteps of women who were never meant to be seen. The KUNOICHI.U climb a mossy slope to an abandoned house, half swallowed by vine and stone. A cracked bamboo mat sits outside. You pause, feel the air. It's as if someone is still watching. The kunoichi were female ninja spies, saboteurs, assassins, seducers, and survivalists. Often trained in the art of invisibility from childhood, they blended into their surroundings by mastering the one thing men in battle rarely noticed: everything domestic. Historians still argue whether kunoichi were formally organized or simply the invention of Edo period dramatists. But scattered records and ninja family scrolls, like those of the famed Hattori and Fujibayashi clans, mention female agents used for infiltration, poison delivery, and intelligence gathering. You duck into the remnants of an old training shed. Inside, a rotted rope swing, a rack of bamboo tubes, and a dusty scroll rolled tight around a sliver of obsidian. You unroll it carefully. The ink reads, "A door opened by charm is easier to close behind you." You smile, classic kunoichi. Wisdom, unlike male ninja, who scaled rooftops and tossed smoke bombs. The kunoichi slipped in as maidservants, courtesans, entertainers, even pilgrims. They observed, reported, and sometimes removed. You step into the garden of what once may have been a training compound. A young girl in your imagination weaves through stepping stones, balancing water pails while humming. She looks harmless, her pails lined with thin knives under floating rice flowers. She's learning more than chores. A popular kunoichi tactic was the use of misugumo, or water spider shoes, to cross small ponds and moats. Another involved releasing sleeping powder into tea rooms using hollowed-out fans. And in one fringe tale, a kunoichi is said to have trained crows to deliver messages between villages. Might be fantasy, or maybe just impressive time management. Here's your quirky tidbit: a rare 17th century manual. The Bansen Shukai mentions a kunoichi technique called utsushi, or mirror painting, the practice of mimicking the gestures and posture of someone else so completely that, in dim light or through a paper screen, you could take their place unnoticed. It wasn't just mimicry, it was transformation. You crouch by an old well. There's a pulley system, here rusted, but still intact. Local legend says kunoichi used wells as secret exits, with tunnels leading into the hillside. One girl reportedly disguised herself as a well maiden for 6 years to gather intelligence on a rival clan. She surfaced, delivered the scroll, and disappeared forever. And what happened when the job was done? They vanished. No tombstones, no medals, no songs, but in every village there's an old woman who seems to move too quietly. Who knows where everything is? Who can read your body language before you've said a word? And maybe she once walked the roofs by moonlight. You step through a ruined doorway now and find a single preserved item on the wall, a small wooden comb, nothing fancy, but tucked inside it, 3 needles, each stained black, a silent promise that the kunoichi were not bound by armor or oaths. They answered to necessity. They fought wars no one wrote about, and they survived often by pretending not to exist at all. So next time you hear a door creak at night, or catch a glimpse of someone too still in the shadows, remember, it may not be your imagination. It might just be that you're not the only one reading the story. A gentle rain begins to fall as you descend from the hills of Aija. The droplets tap against your shoulders like ghost fingers, and the path beneath your feet softens into mud. You've left behind the world of espionage, but not the spirit of defiance. Ahead, nestled between pine-covered hills and the faint smell of iron, lies the clinking echo of hammer on steel. You're entering a forge, but this one's not run by men. Tonight, you meet the blacksmith's daughter, who chose the sword, not by tradition, but by sheer will. The building is low and soot-stained, with a thatched roof, sagging like tired shoulders. Inside, firelight pulses against the walls, and the rhythmic pounding of a mallet keeps time with your heartbeats. At the anvil stands a woman, her sleeves tied back, hair braided tight, face streaked with ash. Her eyes don't leave the blade she's shaping, not even when you step into the room. Her father once forged swords for a local dynasty, but after a debt, a war, or depending on which version of the tale you hear, a betrayal, he vanished, killed, or fled. The village stopped bringing metal. The forge went silent, until she picked up the hammer. You watch her now, working in silence. Sparks fly as steel meets stone. She dips the blade into a trough of water with practiced grace, steam hissing like a whispered warning. The katana she's crafting is curved slightly, heavier than most. It's not meant to be worn for show. It's meant to be used. Historians still argue whether female swordsmiths were allowed, hidden, or simply unacknowledged. Very few official records list women by name, but folklore and oral traditions from mountain villages tell of daughter-smiths who finished their father's orders in secret, who signed their work not with kanji, but with a single petal etched into the tang of the blade. And this woman, she didn't just finish someone else's story. She wrote her own. You ask how she learned the craft. She doesn't answer with words. She pulls a finished sword from the rack and places it in your hands. It's heavier than you expect. Balanced, the grip fits your fingers like it knows you. You see something scratched near the guard. Not a name, a phrase. He would not teach me, so I watched. She practiced in secret, first with scraps, then old iron nails, then real steel. She burned her hands, ruined her lungs, broke 3 toes dropping an unfinished blade. But she learned, every hammer fall became a protest, every finished blade a rebellion, and eventually someone came, a traveler, a fighter, someone who'd heard the rumor of a woman who forged weapons with hands steady as any man's. He tested her work, then ordered 10 more now. Her blades are carried across provinces, some by couriers, some by monks, some by other women warriors, messengers, even the occasional kunoichi who wants a blade not from a factory, but from fire and vengeance. Here's your quirky detail for tonight. In one mountainous hamlet, a sword known as Tsujami no Kiba, the Fang of Sorrow, was revered for decades. It was believed to bring death only to those who deserved it. When the village shrine was robbed, the elders sent for a swordsmith to bless the blade again. The records say the smith who arrived was a very tall man who said little, but one elder's diary reads, his voice cracked oddly, and his eyes were lined with something no boy carries. We'll let you do the math. You spend a quiet hour in the forge. The rain keeps falling, the fire keeps burning. She sharpens another blade as if tuning a song. Then finally she speaks. They said I was not meant to hold the sword. You wait, so I built the kind they couldn't take from me. You bow, she does not, but her nod, barely a tilt of the chin's enough. It says, you understand. As you leave, you feel the blade's memory in your hands. Even now, generations later, descendants of her steel still surface marked, not by a smith's name, but by a symbol, a single falling petal etched into iron, a weapon made not just to cut but to be remembered. The forge behind you fades into smoke and rain. The road ahead curves toward temples and river towns, but your steps don't follow geography anymore. They follow echo's reflections, really. Tonight, you enter the mirror realm, not a place, but a layer of Japan's cultural fabric where stories linger long after the swords have been laid down, where warrior women, erased from scrolls, reappear behind masks, inside poems, and beneath painted fans. This is the realm of art as memory, and you're walking its dreamlike corridors now. Your feet take you to a low, curved bridge leading into a no theater. Inside, the stage glows with warm lantern light. A masked actor moves slowly, deliberately, like a ghost wading through water. He plays a madwoman mourning the loss of her child, but his hand motions, they mimic sword drills. His stance, grounded, brace knot, maternal, but martial. You squint, it's subtle, but unmistakable. This is not just grief, this is training hidden in ritual. Many no plays from the Muromachi and Edo periods contain characters that are veiled echoes of women, warriors, spirit wives, mountain priestesses, haunted daughters. They cry, they wail, but their bodies move with the rhythm of fighters. And sometimes, just sometimes, a line slips out like a blade from behind silk. When the blood ran, I did not weep. I watched. Historians still debate whether these plays were coded tributes or simply dramatic flourish. But playwrights weren't foolish. They knew that truth sometimes had to wear a mask to survive censorship, shame, or simply the discomfort of remembering powerful women. You wander into a poetry house next barely the size of a garden shed. Inside, a gathering of quiet voices reads waka and haiku by flickering candlelight. One poem, attributed to Lady of the North, reads, "The blade I buried beneath the camellia tree rusts for no one else. Another, unsigned, is even sharper. These aren't just poems. They're testimonies. And then there's kabuki, the louder, flashier cousin of no. You sit in a darkened box as the curtain lifts. On stage, a female warrior played by a man, of course, charges into battle, her long sleeves swirling. Like a banner, she defends her blind mother from betrayal. She defeats a general with one arm tied. The audience cheers, but no one asks if the story is real. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. One little-known Edo-era kabuki play, Hana ni Chiru Tsurugi, the sword that falls with the flowers, was banned for 3 years because its heroine refused to die in the final act, a big no-no for a female character. The playwright rewrote the ending to appease the censors, but actors would often accidentally revert to the original. Even paintings played their part. You step into a back room of a local museum and find an Edo period screen painting. It shows a noblewoman pouring tea while 2 retainers wait behind her, but the folds of her kimono, oddly bulky, and her hand, barely visible through translucent fabric, rests on what looks suspiciously like a katana hilt. Is it subtle rebellion, or your imagination? That's the beauty of the mirror realm. Truth refracted, not reflected. These artistic mediums, theater, painting, became safe houses for uncomfortable stories. When a woman could no longer fight in armor, her ghost fought in metaphor. You exit the performance hall and pass a row of wind chimes, each etched with a different kanji: honor, silence, memory, edge. The last one reads simply, her, and as the breeze brushes past, you swear one of them sings in the rhythm of footsteps, quiet, steady, trained, because even when silenced, these women found a way to speak through ink, through masks, through performance, and if you listen closely, they still do. The wind stirs the curtain of the past once again, and you find yourself far from stages and poetry houses. No painted fans here, no ghostly masks. Instead, you're in a dusty field outside a rural village where an old woman with sharp eyes and cracked knuckles sharpens a blade beneath the plum blossoms. Her sleeves are rolled up, her feet are bare, and beside her stands a young samurai, all armored and far too proud. He's about to die. You've arrived at the final act of an old story barely told, aloud the legend of the widow's last. She has no title, no recorded name, just a tale passed down between grannies with crooked smiles and daughters who pretend not to listen. But tonight, you hear it all. It begins with a feud. Her husband, a mid-ranking retainer in a minor domain, was ambushed over land rights by a neighboring clan. A dispute that should have ended in arbitration instead ended in blood and dishonor. No one claimed responsibility. No duel was sanctioned. The local magistrates turned their heads. Her husband's name became a footnote, and so she picked up his sword, not metaphorically, literally. She challenged the young samurai responsible, and he laughed. "She's 60, he said. "She'll break her hip before she reaches the draw." But she didn't draw, not at first. Instead, she stood in the center of the field with the sword point down in the soil, sleeves fluttering in the wind, waiting and waiting until his sneer turned into confusion, then impatience, then fear. Historians still argue whether this duel ever truly happened. There are no official records, only a single temple bell inscribed decades later, for the woman who taught us patience is a blade, and a local bylon ever in force that prohibits dueling after sundown, especially with widows. You watch now as she finally lifts the sword. Her stance is not elegant, her grip is not textbook, but it's effective, because while he postured, she studied. While he flexed, she measured. And when he lunges predictable, prideful, she pivots just enough and strikes low. A cut to the leg, then the hand. She doesn't kill him. She disarms him publicly, irreversibly. He limps from the field, humiliated. She kneels, places the blade back in the earth, and walks home barefoot. She doesn't boast, doesn't write poetry. But the next time a noble's son stirs trouble in town, he looks over his shoulder first, just in case, and here's your quirky tidbit. According to local rumor, that old woman's sword was later passed to a group of traveling female teachers who used it not for combat, but as a pointer during lessons. The blade was never sharpened again. Its edge was now knowledge. You visit that village today. A stone sits at the edge of the field, weathered smooth. Children use it as a climbing rock, but carved into the side faint, but still visible. A single kanji, Suru Crane. Some say it was her name. Others say it was her wish for a long life, folded like wings over those who watched. You sit for a while beneath the plum trees, petals drifting down like confetti from the sky. And you wonder how many other duels were fought like this. How many unrecorded victories. How many women fought not for honor or clan but simply to be seen. No court poets, no painted scrolls, just a blade, a witness, and the truth that refused to be buried. The widow's last duel may be a legend, but tonight it feels like a lesson. You wake beneath the same plum trees, morning sun warming your face. The rock where the widow once stood now casts a long, crooked shadow like the tale of a memory you're not quite ready to release. But today's chapter isn't about blood or blades, it's about love, or at least what passes for love when swords are drawn, and the future is always uncertain. You walk now along the banks of a slow-moving river. The air is heavy with mist, the kind that makes everything feel like a secret. At your feet, something glints, an old arrowhead, half buried in mud. You lift it gently and notice something etched into the iron, a name, a date, and the faint outline of a heart. You've just stumbled into the forgotten world of warrior love letters, the intimate, ink-stained confessions of women who weren't supposed to feel, only fight. This arrowhead isn't a weapon. It's a message in times of siege. When walls separated lovers and letters couldn't be sent openly, warriors especially, women got creative. They carved messages into the shaft of arrows and launched them across rivers, fields, or enemy lines. Not to kill, to say goodbye, or sometimes, not yet. You enter a small archive in an old provincial schoolhouse, where a collection of uchigaki inside writings has been preserved. These weren't letters sent through couriers. They were scrawled on the backs of fans, inside the linings of jackets, or tucked beneath the wrappings of sword hilts. One reads, "If I do not return by first frost, burn the kimono with the plum embroidery. Keep the blade." Another, "He said my hands were too soft for war. I proved him wrong. He forgave me." These aren't poems. They're lived moments, raw, brave, and often heart-wrenching. Historians still debate whether these messages were part of romantic custom or individual desperation. Some argue they're mere artifacts of dramatic imagination, but others point to real correspondences between female warriors and male retainers, or even other women, that reveal a deeply layered, emotional world beneath the lacquered armor. You now walk through a bamboo grove, where a small shrine honors unfulfilled vows. Local legend says to Onna-Bugeisha once made a pact to return here after the war. One did, the other didn't. The surviving warrior built the shrine herself and carved into its gate. Her blade is buried. My heart is not. Still, some stories did have happy endings, though few made it into official records. One tale, preserved in a family's private memoir, tells of a warrior woman and her male counterpart who only ever met in battle on opposite sides. Each spared the other twice. When peace finally came, they met at a ruined castle and married. Instead of exchanging rings, they each buried their swords under a cherry tree. That tree still stands. Your quirky tidbit tonight. During the Edo period, certain rural communities practiced a ritual called hajai, bound affection, in which a woman would braid her lover's name into her hair using inked string before battle. If she fell, the name would survive. If she lived, it was washed out under moonlight, and they were considered bound forever. Hair, it seems, makes a good contract. You reach a river crossing now, where an old woman sells woven charms. One is shaped like an arrowhead. You ask her what it means. Protection, she says. From what? You ask, she leans closer. From forgetting? Because that's the real threat, isn't it? Not death, but being erased from memory, your love, your pain, your promises, lost to silence. And so these warrior women, who bled like their brothers and buried like their fathers, carved their love into steel and wood and skin. Not to be romantic, but to be remembered. You let the arrowhead fall back into the river, watching it sink into the current. Somewhere downstream, maybe someone else will find it, and maybe they'll still hear the whisper, I was here, and I loved. The river fades behind you, its whispered vows drifting into memory. Now, your steps carry you toward a quiet house nestled among hills of blooming henna flowers. There are no swords here, no blood, just silk, lacquered wood, and delicate porcelain. Faces staring up from the floor. But make no mistake, you, VA, just walked into one of the most powerful rituals of remembrance in all of Japan. Tonight, you're attending the Hinamatsuri, the doll festival, also called Girls' Day. But this isn't the gentle celebration you might expect. At least, not in this house. Because here, tucked between ceremonial robes and folded prayers, the dolls don't wear court attire, they wear armor. You step into the main room and freeze. The platform, usually reserved for the imperial doll couple, has been transformed. Instead of a courtly scene, it's a miniature battleground. Rows of handcrafted warrior dolls stand tall, female warriors, each with tiny spears, bow sets, and grim little faces. Some wear helmets made of washi paper, others have Coman armor hybrids stitched with golden thread. They look straight at you, as if daring you to blink first. This isn't typical. Historians still argue whether Hinamatsuri had regional variants that honored women warriors. The official narrative says it's a festival of femininity and hope meant to ward off evil spirits, encourage grace, and symbolize the transition from girlhood to womanhood. But in certain rural provinces, particularly in areas known for rebellions or female-led uprisings, the dolls took on different roles. Here, they weren't just delicate companions. They were vessels of remembrance. You kneel beside the altar as the family matriarch explains. We dress one in armor each year. For the woman who came before, the one who didn't come home. She lifts a small chest and opens it to reveal heirloom accessories, mini-school tanta bladders, a shield the size of a plum, a cape made from a strip of fox fur, all scaled for dolls, but each one tied to a real name written on folded paper. Mothers, aunts, sisters, forgotten swordswomen, whose stories live on in miniature. One doll bears a chipped eye and a broken hand. You ask about it, that one's for my grandmother, the woman says. She never picked up a sword, but she made sure no man could stop me from doing so. And now your quirky tidbit. During the Edo period, some villages in Tohoku held a secret second Hinamatsuri each year, not in spring, but in early autumn. It was called Uramashi no Hai, or Day of the Grudging Spirits. Families would dress male dolls as generals and female dolls as avengers, reenacting battles never acknowledged in local records. No prayers, just memory theater. You watch as a little girl in a blue yukata places a rice cracker before the armored doll. Then she adjusts its tiny naginata with all the gravity of a battlefield retainer. Her grandmother nods approvingly. She'll be ready, she says, softly but with steel. Outside, paper streamers rustle in the wind. Traditionally, they carry hopes for girls' beauty, good marriages, safe childbirth. But here, one streamer flaps with the kanji for honor, another defense, and one drawn in a child's bold stroke simply says, strength. You ask if the dolls are ever retired. The matriarch smiles, only when we've forgotten who they were, and we haven't, not yet. You rise to leave as dusk pools across the tatami. A doll near the doorway catches your eye. Unlike the others, she's mounted on a tiny horse, her face serene, her posture fierce. She wears a red sash. Her name tag reads, Tomoe. You smile, because even centuries later, through doll-sized armor and whispered stories, the warrior women are still here, still watching, still standing, even if they're only 10 inches tall. The dolls fade into shadow as you step outside, their tiny spears still raised in silent vigil. The wind carries the faint scent of pine, resin, and cooling stone. It's darker, now quieter. You've left the flicker of hearth fires and entered a place colder, older, and more difficult to define. Tonight, you sit cross-legged in a half-forgotten shrine, listening to the contradiction at the heart of Japan's warrior code. Because for centuries, women were expected to live within Bushido, the way of the warrior. But that path was never built for them, and yet they walked it anyway. So now, we untangled the paradox, feminine power in a masculine code. You run your fingers over the carved characters in the shrine's wall. They speak of duty, loyalty, self-sacrifice, honor in death. These values shaped generations of samurai. They were not optional. They were the foundation of identity. But for women, these same rules applied, and yet never applied equally. A male warrior who died in combat became a hero. A woman who defended her home often went unmentioned less. Her actions embarrassed the clan, in which case she became a warning. Women were told to be soft, compliant, nurturing, but they were also expected to protect the family honor at all costs, to raise warrior sons, and to die quietly, beautifully if scandal or defeat touched their name. You see the catch now, don't you? Bushido gave women a sword with no sheath, a role with no recognition, and yet they made it their own. You read from a scroll left here by a visiting priestess. It's not scripture, it's a treatise, The Sword Behind the Smile. In it, she argues that the women of samurai households were not passive recipients of code, they were interpreters, bending Bushido to include themselves in ways that men never expected. For instance, when a male samurai fell in battle, it was his duty to commit seppuku. For women, it became Jaigaya, quieter, more elegant death. But many women didn't follow that path. They fought back instead, with kitchen knives, with boiling water, with deception, with grace weaponized. Historians still argue whether women truly internalized Bushido or simply performed it when necessary. But diary entries, temple scrolls, and legal petitions from female warriors show clear patterns. They knew the code. They lived the code. They just weren't always credited with it. Here's your quirky detail for tonight. In one preserved Edo-era letter, a samurai wife chastises her younger cousin for considering marriage to a man who cannot ride, cannot write, and weeps when drunk. Her advice: marry a fool only if you're ready to wield both sword and house key. Ouch. You smile, but then your gaze drifts to a small wooden plaque hanging near the shrine's doorway. It bears a single poem, unsigned. I stitched my name into his banner, not so he'd remember, but so they'd know who taught him to stand. And suddenly you realize Bushido was never one thing. For men, it was a code of action. For women, it was often a code of adaptation. And when wielded by both, it became survival. You light a stick of incense now, watching the smoke coil toward the rafters. You think of the women who stood behind doors with blades hidden in sleeves, the ones who raised samurai sons with stories not of conquest, but of restraint, the ones who died without titles, but with spines so straight they could have balanced swords on their shoulders. And you wonder if Bushido is a road. Wasn't it the women who taught the men how to walk without falling? Because for every epic duel and battlefield poem, there was a woman somewhere, sewing wounds, hiding maps, teaching the difference between rage and resolve. That's not a footnote. That's the whole damn prologue. Dawn presses gently against the horizon as you descend from the shrine, sandals whispering across damp moss. You've wandered through whispers and war cries, hidden blades and temple bells, and now, without quite realizing, you've stepped into the present. And standing before you, with a wooden sword in one hand and a smartphone in the other, is the next generation. Welcome to the world of Japan's modern women warriors. You arrive at a city dojo, tucked between convenience stores and apartment blocks. Inside, fluorescent lights hum overhead and beneath them. A group of women in crisp white gi performs slow, deliberate kata with naginata long-handled, blades that sweep and snap through the air like arcs of wind. Their movements echo everything you've seen before: the precision of Tomoe Gozen, the stance of Nakano Takeko, the patience of the widow in the plum orchard. But now there's no need to hide it. You sit on the polished floor beside a rack of gear bags and watch as a teenage girl practices a three-point block, her ponytail swinging, her face taut with concentration. Her instructor is a retired police officer. Her senpai is a university professor. There's a mother of two, a former fashion editor, and one quietly terrifying 83-year-old who teaches joint locks that shouldn't work but do. These women aren't reenacting the past, they're reclaiming it in modern Japan. Martial arts once dominated by Menkendo, Kaido, Judo are increasingly led by women at the national level. Entire tournaments exist for female-only divisions, and the art of naginata, once considered a woman's weapon, has become both a sport and a living connection to samurai heritage. Historians still argue whether modern practitioners can be compared to their battlefield ancestors. After all, no one in this dojo expects to defend a castle. But to dismiss these women as hobbyists would miss the point. You speak with one of them, a soft-spoken librarian who trains 3 nights a week. I don't need to fight, she says. But I need to remember that I could, if I had to. That's it, isn't it? Because this isn't about nostalgia. It's about continuity. You visit a university archive next, where a young researcher shows you a digital exhibit she's created, an interactive map of Japan's historical Onna-Bugeisha. She's traced burial sites, battlefields, and family shrines, cross-referenced with oral histories and even DNA data. When you ask her why she made it, she shrugs. No one else was going to. And then you attend a film screening, an indie documentary featuring descendants of female warriors, including the great-grandniece of Nakano Takeko. She trains with a replica naginata and hosts an annual parade in full armor. The documentary ends with her standing beside her ancestors' grave, saying, "I'm not here to fix the past. I'm here to finish the sentence. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night." In 2017, a women's naginata demonstration in Tokyo accidentally went viral when someone added dramatic music and samurai movie sound effects to the video. The clip reached over 1 million views. When interviewed, the performers laughed and said, "It's not cosplay, we're serious and we're strong." Back in the dojo, practice is ending. The students bow, mop the floors, and check their phones. One girl scrolls through a meme of a cat holding a katana. Another adjusts her wrist brace and starts texting her mum. And yet there's nothing diluted here. Every strike they practiced tonight was part of a thread, a line stretching backward through centuries, through every woman who picked up a blade and refused to ask for permission as you leave. You pass a framed quote near the exit, written in brush calligraphy. "Our grandmothers hid their weapons. We wear them on our sleeves." You smile, because the Onna-Bugeisha never really disappeared. They just adapted. And tonight, they walk city streets in sneakers and blazers, carrying history in their spines. Evening deepens around you, wrapping the city in amber and violet. You've traced blades through history, walked among ghosts, and listened to whispers buried in shrines and dojo floors. But there's one more place you must go, not forward, not back, but sideways, to a moment that is neither past nor present, tonight, beneath a blood-orange moon. You stand at the edge of a windswept battlefield that never existed on any map, because now, at last, you're entering the space where all the women warriors stand, side by side, across time. This is your final reckoning with the story. You see them gathered in the moonlight. Tomoe Gozen atop her black horse, Nakano blade drawn, Nakano beneath her white banner, cherry blossoms stuck in her armor. The blacksmith's daughter, hammer slung across her back. The kunoichi crouched on the branch of a dying pine. A courtesan turned bodyguard, adjusting her lacquered hairpin. Deadly with grace. They don't speak, they wait. Behind them, countless others, nameless, faceless, unrecorded yet unmistakably present. 1,000 silhouettes, each with different weapons, robes, burdens. They carry rice baskets, arrows, temple bells, ink brushes, children, all of it, all at once. This isn't a memory, it's not folklore, it's the gathering of memory itself. You watch as the women step forward, one by one, each leaves something behind. Tomoe places her quiver at the base of a tree. Nakano removes her blood-stained sash and lays it across a stone. A peasant girl with ashes-smudged cheeks offers a wooden comb, cracked but cherished. These are not offerings. They are receipts, proof that they were here. And then you notice the battlefield has no enemy, no banners, no conquest, because this isn't about what they fought against, it's about what they fought for. Historians still argue whether these women should be called warriors, defenders, rebels, or martyrs. They debate vocabulary, context, citation, but the women here don't argue, they simply are. And now comes your quirky detail, though it doesn't feel quirky at all. There's an old saying passed through some rural parts of Kyushu, etched onto family prayer boards and worn wooden ladles. If a woman falls with a blade in her hand, the wind will not forget her stance. Tonight, you feel that wind, it brushes past your cheek and whispers, not of names or victories, but of stance, of how you carry yourself, of what you defend even when no one's watching. And then the women begin to fade, not vanish, not disappear, just step back into shadows, into songs, into the spaces between festival dolls and family heirlooms, into the folds of stories whispered, from mother to daughter, teacher to student, friend to friend. You're left standing alone, but only technically, because once you've seen them, really seen them, you'll never walk into silence again. You'll hear their footsteps in gravel paths, their breath in bamboo groves, their resolve in the crack of wooden swords at modern dojos. Their presence is stitched into this country, like a secret lining, and now you carry it too. And now the world softens. You walk a narrow trail lit by paper lanterns, each one gently swaying in the night breeze. The distant clang of sparring steel, the roar of battle, the whispered vows and hidden blades, they all begin to fade behind. You, like echoes slipping into mist. This is not a place of war, it's a place of remembrance. Ahead stands a quiet hill overlooking the sea. A line of stone markers rests at its summit, weathered but carefully tended. No names, no clan crests, just a series of symbols, a single petal, a foxtail, a folded fan, a half moon, a falling leaf. These are the graves of women who were never supposed to be remembered, and yet here they are. You sit among them now. The wind moves through the grass, and the stars blink gently overhead. In the distance, the tide comes and goes like breath. You notice offerings left by others, bamboo practice swords, faded ribbons, fragments of old armor, slips of calligraphy wrapped in twine. A girl kneels nearby, no older than 10. She sets a rice ball at one marker and whispers, "Thank you for teaching me to be brave." That's all. Then she rises and leaves. You don't ask who she is. You don't need to. Because in that moment, you understand something sacred. The story never ends. It only pauses in places like this, where rest is earned, and memory stands guard. And still, the contradictions hum beneath your feet. These women lived in a society that celebrated their discipline while erasing their deeds, that praised their loyalty but feared their leadership, that called them both too dangerous and too delicate, and yet despite it all they chose to stand, to defend, to bleed, to fight, and when the world looked away, they wrote themselves back in one hidden scroll, one broken blade, one whispered bedtime tale at a time. Here's one final quirky detail. In a remote island village, there's a temple, bell inscribed with a peculiar haiku. When they ask my name, I'll hand them a mirror and wait for them to see. You smile at that, because after all this time, you've seen, haven't you? You rise slowly, bow to the stones, and begin your descent from the hill. Behind you, the graves remain silent, but somehow not alone, because every step you take now carries their weight, their strength, their story, and somewhere beneath a paper. Sky, another girl, is picking up a bokken for the first time. She doesn't yet know why. But one day, she'll understand, and maybe, just maybe, she'll remember you, too. And now, the world softens. You walk a narrow trail lit by paper lanterns, each one gently swaying in the night breeze. The distant clang of sparring steel, the roar of battle, the whispered vows and hidden blades, they all begin to fade behind. You, like echoes slipping into mist. This is not a place of war, it's a place of remembrance. Ahead stands a quiet hill overlooking the sea. A line of stone markers rests at its summit, weathered but carefully tended. No names, no clan crests, just a series of symbols, a single petal, a foxtail, a folded fan, a half moon, a falling leaf. These are the graves of women who were never supposed to be remembered. And yet here they are. You sit among them now. The wind moves through the grass, and the stars blink gently overhead. In the distance, the tide comes and goes like breath. You notice offerings left by others' bamboo practice swords, faded ribbons, fragments of old armor, slips of calligraphy wrapped in twine. A girl kneels nearby, no older than 10. She sets a rice ball at one marker and whispers, "Thank you for teaching me to be brave." That's all. Then she rises and leaves. You don't ask who she is. You don't need to, because in that moment you understand something sacred. The story never ends. It only pauses in places like this where rest is earned, and memory stands guard. And still, the contradictions hum beneath your feet. These women lived in a society that celebrated their discipline while erasing their deeds, that praised their loyalty but feared their leadership, that called them both too dangerous and too delicate. And yet, despite it all, they chose to stand, to defend, to bleed, to fight, and when the world looked away, they wrote themselves back in, one hidden scroll, one broken blade, one whispered bedtime tale at a time. Here's one final quirky detail. In a remote island village, there's a temple bell inscribed with a peculiar haiku. When they ask my name, I'll hand them a mirror and wait for them to see. You smile at that dot, because, after all this time, you've seen, haven't you? You rise slowly, bow to the stones, and begin your descent from the hill. Behind you, the graves remain silent, but somehow, not alone, because every step you take now carries their weight, their strength, their story, and somewhere, beneath the paper, sky, another girl is picking up a bokken for the first time. She doesn't yet know why, but one day she'll understand, and maybe, just maybe, she'll remember you, too.